Hi, Evonne.
Hello, hello.
And hello, audience. It is wonderful to be here with you all today. As is the usual way we start these sessions off, let's make sure that you can see us and hear us. So if you wouldn't mind just typing into the chat that the audio and the video is coming in clearly. And if you want to throw in where you're tuning in from, that would be nice to know too, just so we get a sense of where we've got folks coming from around the world who are curious to learn about breastfeeding in the real world.
Yes,
My name
where in the
is
world are you going to be breastfeeding?
Yes, yeah. Where in the real world are you going to be? Oh, hi, Melissa. Good to see you, DJ Immortal. Really appreciating the volunteering of backup DJ services for any
All
time
right.
anything goes wrong. Pauline from France. All right, Melissa is kicking it in Austin and Boulder, Colorado.
Beautiful.
We have confirmation. So Evonne, I think that we are good to go. My name is
Perfect.
my name is Ashley. I am with the Discover team here at Teachable. We have the honor of bringing in creators of all types to do live events. These are folks who develop courses, share their knowledge, share their learning through the Teachable platform and other learning platforms. And we invite them to come on and share a little bit of the wisdom that they have with you all, the audience, for free as a way of demonstrating what there is out there to dive into. So I'm especially excited today to be chatting with our guest, Evonne, for many reasons, not the least of which is that I myself am carrying a baby around currently and am very soon going to be needing these tips from our guest, who is a lactation consultant and works specifically on figuring out how to educate parents to give them confidence. Evonne, you have several specialties, all of which feel very pertinent to me in this moment, helping with sleep training, right? All these kinds of different new parent journeys that, as somebody who is a pregnant person with pregnant with my first child, I didn't even know where to start. So now I'm sort of hearing phrases and learning a little bit about what I need to know, but it still feels very intimidating. So I'm grateful for you today for the philosophy that you take in your work, which is to make this approachable and take
Yes.
some of the scariness out of it. So I'd love to start just by hearing a little bit about your journey and how you ended up in this space. Um, before we do that, though, just so audience, there will be a replay available of this session. So if you miss anything or aren't quick enough with the notes, we will be able to send you a replay of the entire session. So you'll have access to that. You can also find it on the Discover YouTube channel. So like and subscribe there, and you'll know anytime we have folks like Evonne coming to join us. Um,
Yes.
Without any further ado, tell us your story, Evonne. How did you end up on this journey and in this position of helping parents uh, approach this new phase of life with a little bit less fear?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I have a host of specialties in the postpartum, just after birth, or just after bringing baby home field. I got my start as a newborn care specialist or postpartum doula, kind of a hybrid of those. And with that, I was really interested in helping families learn how to transition into life with new baby, because we all know intellectually that it's a big transition, but there's not really a way to completely prepare for it because a lot of it is such a visceral experience. Through my time as a newborn care specialist, I would typically show up to people's house at 10 p.m. and leave at 6 in the morning and help them through the night, which tends to be the hardest part of taking care of a newborn with new families. And I realized that everything did seem harder in the middle of the night. 3 a.m. is my favorite time to talk about because that's when crazy things happen with the baby. And I noticed that a lot of my clients are breastfeeding and they seem to really have issues, especially if you're having pain. Your baby's going to be feeding very frequently, no matter how your baby's fed, about every 3 hours. So if you're having issues with pain and you can't see someone for 24 hours, for example, you still have at least 8 feedings where you're going through that pain. And I felt I wanted to be able to help more. I was there, but I didn't know how to help with the breastfeeding. And that's when I started to study to become a lactation consultant. Also, with lactation consulting and with the overnight care, sleep is a big aspect. The vast majority of my clients are working parents, and with the way we have things set up in the US where I live and practice, we are not very kind to postpartum parents in terms of parental leave after birth. So people are expected to be awake with the baby all night and be awake all day at work. And that just doesn't add up. And I found a lot of people were suffering in mental health areas, especially when it comes to breastfeeding and sleep and the intersection of those. So I will see if we get our next slide going. And these are my 3 main areas of expertise. So, as a lactation consultant, I help new families with breast and bottle feeding. One of my favorite specialties is tethered oral tissues, tongue ties, lip ties. You'll hear about those. It's a pretty hot topic these days. Also, newborn care and sleep. The approach that I take is a very gentle approach. We are not leaving babies to cry it out. We talk about how to build healthy sleep foundations and how that works for both the baby and the family. So I like to use an approach of this is the family's needs or the adult's needs, these are the baby's needs. How do we meet in the middle versus pushing all the way to either side? Practical tips is really my focus. I don't like to spend a ton of time on the theory because the theory is not what's going to get you through the middle of the night when your kid's screaming at you. It's like, what are the actual tips? How do I hold the baby? How do I bounce the baby? What else do I need to know? And I'm also a healing arts practitioner. And I like to say that I practice energy medicine or energy healing and nervous system regulation. This is
Mm,
a piece that we don't really pay very much attention to. With breastfeeding, it's like all about the boobs and all about the baby's mouth, but we don't talk about the emotional experience, how you had a relationship with your parents, the birth, all of that can impact your relationship with your baby and how you're able to care for your
mhm.
baby. And in a lot of the professional spheres where we're talking about lactation or sleep, they tend to not talk to each other. And we have best practices for lactation, best
Right.
practices for sleep, and there are many, many fights in the professional groups online where they're all bad mouthing each other. And that doesn't serve families. And that's really what I want to do is actually serve families. And by working with, it was 506 babies. I stopped counting a few months ago. Last
Ah,
time I counted, I
so
should
many
say.
babies.
It's so many babies. And so I got like a really big view of like what people actually need, what was going to serve families versus this idea of what we think actually helps. And that's really what informs the way that I teach. So I would love to start to talk to you guys about nervous system regulation. I'm also going to
Amazing.
talk to you guys about my pose framework. We got a little hint in the bottom corner there. And starting here, we're talking about the central nervous system. We may not have heard very much about it, but I'm pretty sure everyone has heard the term fight or flight. That is the sympathetic nervous system state. So that's when your body is really poised, it's ready to act. Fight, flight, or freeze is the true system. And then in contrast, we have the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the relaxed rest and digest system. If we have had a rough day, if we're in a state of overwhelm, if we had trauma around the birth or even from breastfeeding not going well after the birth, the body is going to be stuck in this really tense fight or flight state. And it's much harder to cope with everyday stresses, to learn new things, to deal with sleep deprivation. When you have a newborn, you won't be getting as much sleep as you're used to. And I found that that really got in the way of parents having more success because they could get the information about what to do in that situation. But if their actual body, if their system was not hardwired to process that, it was almost a lost cause. It would go in one ear and out the other. So we need to know that newborns take their cues from the nervous system of their caregivers. They're just born, they just got here, and they're still learning how to regulate all of their systems. So they really are dependent on their parents or their caregivers. And the baby can only be as regulated as you are. I find that the analogy driving on the highway, let's say you have a busy highway where there's traffic. If you were sitting in the back seat of this car and there was a person driving, if that person was speeding, going very fast, and they're swerving the car and they're honking and they're really flustered, you in the back seat would start to feel insecure because you're like, I don't know if I can trust this person, but they're driving. That's how the baby feels if the adult or the caregiver is in that really unsteady or that fight or flight state and unable to kind of calm. When the parent is in that state, the baby's in that state too. So feeding gets to be a lot harder. Now, it's much easier said than done to calm down. If you've ever been upset and someone said the words calm down, if you're like me, that is a trigger to turn into the Hulk and get even more upset. So know that it is a practice, and there are things that we can do to actually shift our nervous system state. And we see this here, the cheapest, fastest, most effective tool you can use to help regulate your own state and therefore your baby's nervous system is to use your breath. That is always with you, always available, and it's something you don't have to think about too much. So I wanted to give you two simple techniques that you can use, almost biohacking, if you find yourself in that fight or flight state, or if your baby is in that really tense, mad, yelling, screaming state. These are two simple techniques that you can do to help move them from fight or flight to the more relaxed rest and digest. The first technique we'll talk about is called the 4-7-8 breath. Now, that is an inhale for a count of 4, holding your breath for 7 counts, and exhaling for the full 8 counts. If you make your exhales longer than your inhales, that's a signal to your body that everything is calm. The opposite of that is hyperventilating. So we want to begin to make those exhales much longer. With that, again, you can shift your body from that more tense, stressed out fight or flight to the more relaxed rest and digest. Now, let's say that you yourself are in a more unsteady state. You're feeling more stressed, so you find yourself getting frustrated for whatever reason. The 4-7-8 breath can feel a little bit more challenging if you're already not relatively calm. So, another option you have is called the box breath. And that is super, super simple. So, I like to use a count of 4 for the box breath. And that is an inhale for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and hold it for 4 counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and you would just kind of continue with that. Typically, I like to do 3 to 5 rounds of these breaths, and you can actually feel in your body, in the front of your body, when your body is beginning to shift into that more relaxed state. You can learn when this happens for babies too. And I call that the calm signal. I've seen this in all of the babies that I've worked with. I don't know if it has a more official name, but I call it the calm signal. The signal you're looking for is 2 quick inhales and an exhale, or like a calm sigh. And that's how I know whatever soothing technique I've been using has worked. So I'm waiting for the baby to relax and for that adrenaline and cortisol that are produced in that fight or flight state when those have died down. Moving on, forward, not backward. We are going to take a quick pause together so you can get a felt experience of what this nervous system shift looks like. So, wherever you are, if it's safe, I invite you to get into a comfortable seat or lie down if you're available to do that.
Oh, I'm going to do this.
All right, get in position.
Get in position.
With your eyes closed, if that feels safe or if that's good. Or if not, you can just do a soft gaze, soft, unfocused, not staring at anything in particular. I invite you to begin just noticing your breath. You don't have to breathe in any particular way. Just notice the rising and falling sensations in your body. And I'd also like you to take note of how your body feels right now, because we're going to check in afterwards. Is there any tension in your jaw, your neck or throat, Your shoulders, that's where I tend to hold a lot of my tension. The front of your belly. Just take note of how they feel now. There's no good or bad. And as you bring your attention back to the breath, focus on the warm air flowing out and the cool air flowing in. And you can begin to make those exhales a little bit longer. And when you inhale, you want to imagine almost as if you had lungs in your pelvis, in your hip area. And as you inhale, you want to fill those lungs way down deep in your belly. So we're taking big pregnant belly breaths. If it feels good, we can exhale with sound. And imagine as you exhale, some of that tension being melted away. We're also going to try a little bit of visualization here. So I'd like you to first place your attention on the point of contact between your body and the surface beneath you. Whether that's a chair, the bed, the floor. Feel the weight of your body pressing down. And as we continue with these deep breaths, on your next exhale, see if you can give yourself over to that surface a little bit more. Let that chair, that bed, that seat hold you, the floor. And I'd like you to imagine a rope, a golden rope that is connected from the base of your spine or your tailbone that goes down into the center of the earth, deep, deep down. And as you inhale, you're drawing in relaxation, positivity, good vibes, as I like to say. And on your exhale, you're exhaling all the stuff that you don't need. The stress, the anxiety, whatever you have to do after this talk we're going to have today. Set that to the side just for now. Know that you'll have to pick it up and it'll be available to pick it up as soon as we're done here. Take 2 more breaths at your own pace. And when you're ready, slowly begin to wiggle your fingers and toes, bringing your awareness from inside your body back to the room around you. And then you can go ahead and very gently open your eyes. You don't have to look directly at the screen. Feel free to look back at the room itself. And when your eyes are ready, come back to the screen. All right. So I invite you to put in the chat box if you're watching live, how are you feeling after that? I feel more of a spaciousness inside my belly and my shoulders feel a little bit more relaxed. Let's see what you have to say here. I have 2 screens, so you'll see me looking down.
I love
Perfect.
The suggestion to breathe. Imagine that you have lungs in your pelvis. I've done a lot of breathing exercises before but never really thought about it that way. And that visualization helped kind of ground that breath a lot. That was a really effective suggestion for me.
Thank you. When we are in that stressed out state, our breath tends to rise up into the top of our
Yeah,
chest, and we have pretty
for sure.
shallow breaths.
Yeah.
When we're more relaxed, we're breathing lower. So that's excellent. Now that we're in our more relaxed space, let's go ahead and talk about how you can actually move away from or how you can overcome breastfeeding difficulties from this holistic standpoint. We'll get our slides going. There we go. So I like to use what I call the POSE framework. And these are rules of thumb to keep in mind whenever you are dealing with a breastfeeding issue, no matter what it is. This can be applied in a variety of contexts. So POSE, as you can see here, stands for protect, your outlook, sustainable or sustainability, and then E is for experts or exit strategy.
Mm.
So when we talk about protect, the first thing is to protect the baby. Number one rule of breastfeeding is feed the baby with whatever means necessary. The baby is relying on us as the parents, the adults, the caregivers, the professionals to make sure that they are getting enough to eat. So always make sure, regardless of whether you're having low supply or baby's not latching, baby needs to get enough to eat. You can supplement at the breast, you can bottle feed. Your lactation consultant will help you with this, with a specific plan. Number two rule is to protect the milk supply. No matter if your baby's not latching or if you have low supply, when we're working out breastfeeding issues, making sure that we have enough breast stimulation, so enough pumping or nursing, that works like a restaurant kitchen. That's how milk production works. If you don't place the order, you will not get a food. You will not get your dish. You got to make sure that you're placing the order. So for most people, that means nursing or pumping 8 times a day. And if you have special cases, again, your lactation consultant can help you with that. But as long as you're making sure baby's getting enough to eat and you're putting in a big enough order to the restaurant, or the breastaurant as I call it, those are your insurance policies. You can take as much time as you need to figure things out as long as you keep both of those ideas in mind. Another one that I like to mention is protecting the whole health. Earlier, I was talking about how a lot of postpartum professionals tend to be very tunnel visioned and not really aware of some of the other things our parents are going through. And we need to make sure that we are considering all aspects of the health for both the parent and the baby. When we're talking about holistic health, I like to make sure we're addressing the physical, whether that's for milk production or getting enough to eat, getting enough sleep. And then emotional and mental health are important too. I do not believe in a breastfeeding at all costs model. I want to make sure we're breastfeeding in a way that's working for the family, regardless of what shape that takes. O, as we're moving on, is for your outlook. And the important thing to remember with this one is that your mindset matters. As a healing arts practitioner, I've seen that time and time again. The idea, the mindset that a family has is really, really impactful on how they get through the breastfeeding difficulties. We like to talk about this idea of self-efficacy. And what that means, we see our little image in our top right corner here. From the little engine that could. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I know I can. And it's this gut level belief, this confidence that you can do it. It may not look exactly the way that we planned before we started, but just knowing that it will work out if you're flexible enough to be open-minded about how it goes. We actually have studies that show that taking breastfeeding classes can help to boost self-efficacy. So boost the person's confidence in breastfeeding working out. And the people who have higher self-efficacy are the ones who have higher breastfeeding duration and exclusivity rates. So making sure that you have this mindset, like, I know I can do it, I just need to figure out how. And that's really a piece that we'll talk about in just a second. Now, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love that because there seem to be so many instances in, I mean, certainly in prenatal health, but I think in public health overall, where our ability to feel confidence in our choices and advocate for ourselves comes from actually just understanding a little bit more, having more knowledge. And I have found that already in the process of being pregnant. And I think it's a great, a great thing to also apply to your approach to breastfeeding. So like that, go in with some knowledge and some information and an openness, knowing that, your plan is probably not going to work out exactly the way that you imagined it would, but that's okay. And there is still this host of healthy options. And I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, I like to tell parents, especially first timers, before the baby is born, it's important to have a plan and also know that the baby does not know or care what your plan is. So you
Right.
need to be able to adapt. But having a plan is helpful just to begin.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of parents, when they are new, especially in the age of social media, when we're following all these accounts and we're all in of these social media groups, people will often post pictures of like, look how much milk I just pumped. And that can really create a sense of inadequacy. I find that typically the only people, not the only people, but most of the people who are motivated to post those pictures are online are the people are who produce more than normal. And so that can also make some parents feel like, oh, I see this lady posted a picture where she has 500 ounces of milk in the freezer and I only have 5 ounces. Oh no, I'm
Where are
not
all
making
my
enough milk.
ounces? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I find that that comes from this underlying belief or this placing of self worth in how much milk you make. That is
Mhm.
a biological process that we can influence with our behaviors, but sometimes there are genetic and other
Right.
health factors that impact that. It can be really discouraging if you aren't able to produce as much milk or if you're still figuring out how. Just knowing that says nothing about your worth to your baby or as a parent or as a person. How well your baby latches is also not indicative of your worth as a parent.
Important
Now,
reminders.
yes, it's like it's one of these gut level things that as I'm working with parents, I'm realizing some of the mindsets that they have and they may not even be aware of. Now, my
Yeah.
favorite topic here when it comes to working through breastfeeding issues is how we view them. I like to make sure that whatever the problem is, we're looking at it from a lens of creating more possibilities versus dead ends. Now,
Mm,
I've heard many parents mention, oh, my baby's a lazy eater, or this is my slacker breast. It's normal for one breast to produce more milk than the other. And so oftentimes people will be like, oh, that's my slacker boob, it's always slacking. And
I didn't even think about that.
it's most people don't typically know it. And so you're
Yeah,
expecting to
until
get
you
exactly
sure.
even. From those kinds of points of view, or another popular one, my baby's using me as a pacifier, that
Mm,
doesn't give you any options for how to move forward. If you say my baby's a lazy eater, they don't really like breastfeeding because they're lazy, the only solution you have is, well, can't do anything unless my baby decides to stop being a lazy bum.
right.
That doesn't help anybody.
Not productive. Yeah.
Not productive. And so you want to think about what's getting in the way of baby doing what you're asking them to do. And that gives you so many more possibilities for things you can look into and tweak and adjust versus, well, that's just the way it is. I guess I got to suck it up or just quit.
Right. It's such a, I love that you're talking about this holistic approach, which I mean, very clearly there's psychology here that is the same that I've heard talked about in parenting philosophy and even in talk therapy situations where you are more likely to be able to proceed positively if you're thinking about something as a behavior or an occurrence rather than like an attribute of, it doesn't mean that your baby is lazy. It might mean that there is X or Y thing happening currently. So that's sort of like the possibility versus dead end approach, which feels really much more freeing.
Yes, exactly. And so, yeah, there are many more options. We can make more choices from that standpoint too.
Right,
We get to
right.
decide whether we want to look for, I call it turning over rocks. Because if we look at the situation and there's not an obvious reason, that's when people tend to default to the lazy or the slacker
Mm,
terminology. And those words have a negative connotation.
right.
Whereas if we look for, okay, what's getting in the way, we can look in a whole bunch of different places.
Mm,
Now, the S in POSE stands for sustainable, and that's a really important piece to consider when we're talking about mental health as well, because breastfeeding, we tend to give this message of breastfeeding is the best, it's the most natural, and it can be all of those things. But from looking at it from a holistic standpoint, if breastfeeding is causing or costing a lot to the parent's mental health, and they are not emotionally available to be there for their baby because they're trying so hard to make breastfeeding work in this one very narrow way, that doesn't actually serve families.
Right.
Healthy baby is not the only goal. I believe that what makes a happy, healthy baby is a happy, healthy parent, because they are the foundation for the baby, their relationship to themselves and to the world. So making sure that you are well supported and happy and healthy is automatically going to influence the baby, no matter how you're breastfeeding or not breastfeeding.
It's the oxygen mask, right? As
Yes.
you got to put yours on first.
You must. And especially in the States, we have we have this idea that the best parents are the ones that make the most sacrifices. And I don't find that to be true.
Yeah.
I find the parents who make the smart sacrifices or the smart compromises is really what it is. When we're making empowered choices, that's when it tends to go a lot better.
Yeah.
We've already been talking about how breastfeeding doesn't exist in a vacuum. There is breastfeeding. There are whole different hosts. You can breastfeed the baby at the breast. You can produce breast milk, exclusively pumping, and just give the breast milk in the bottle to the baby. And then you can do a combination. So you can do some feeding at the breast, some feeding in the bottle, some breast milk, some formula, just depending on where you are and what works for your family. Breastfeeding is hard, and I don't really shy away from that. And we need to keep a balance of baby's needs, baby's food needs, emotional needs, attachment needs, your needs as a parent for producing milk, not having pain, sleep, mental health if you're working. And it's a complex balance. So we have to keep all of these points in mind as we're balancing them. When I work with my clients, I help them to create the unique balance for them because it's not the same for everybody. And when you're creating a plan, your capacity matters, and everyone's capacity is different. For example, if someone came to me with a breastfeeding issue and maybe they're going back to work in 3 days, they may not be able to use as much of an intensive care plan because they have to balance their need to sleep at night with going to work in the morning versus someone who might be on leave for the next 12 weeks. They may have different capacity or different support systems. So it is important to consider that in your plan. We want to know, how sane is your routine? Sometimes we'll see advice or get advice that does not make any sense to us, but we do it because we think that it's the right thing for our babies, and we want to do the right thing for our babies. You always want to think about, whenever you're getting advice, how does it actually feel to you? Is there another way? Now, we have our little piece here, fed is best. That is a statement that most parents tend to agree with. There's an organization called Fed is Best that's actually not helpful for breastfeeding, and there's a lot of vitriol in some of the messaging they have around Fed is best. But the idea of, yes, I want my baby fed, I don't care how it needs to happen, is appealing to parents because it's this idea of not putting one specific ideal over your own mental health and over the baby's needs as well. So keeping in mind, any breastfeeding plan a good breastfeeding plan needs to keep all of these pieces in consideration when it's being created. Now we have our E for experts, and experts or exit strategy is what I use the E for. You are going to need a team of experts. Breastfeeding, raising a baby it's not meant to be a solo sport. It can be if you have a good support system. And when I say experts, that doesn't just mean professional experts that you have to hire. You're going to want people who are experts on you. People who know you well, your friends, your family. They can help you understand. Sometimes if you're in the breastfeeding throes and you're working through issues, it can be hard to kind of zoom out and realize, like, oh, I think this is kind of taking a toll on my mental health, but I was so zoomed in, I didn't really see it. So you need those people who can help you understand when it's time to call for backup. You need feeding experts. Just like if you needed a cardiologist for a heart specialty, you wouldn't necessarily go to a dermatologist. Making sure if you have a breastfeeding issue, you're going to a breastfeeding specialist. You need infant health specialists or experts. Those can be pediatricians. They typically don't receive a ton of breastfeeding management education. So we want to make sure that we're using that collaborative team-based approach. And you also need parental health experts, mental health experts, physical recovery. If you were to get an infection, you need to make sure that you have that support too.
Mm.
When it comes to having this team of experts, you want to make sure that you have the right fit. Unfortunately, it's not really good enough to just find any old lactation consultant or any old doctor. You need to find someone who you feel supported, safe, and calm with. Real talk, your lactation consultant is probably going to be seeing you half naked and in tears, and you're not going to have the luxury of weeks or months to get to know them before you need them. So you need somebody who you trust at a gut level, like right away.
Yeah.
That's how I've seen 65 to 70% of my clients, and it's totally normal.
Yeah.
The last piece for this we'll talk about is the exit strategy, knowing that this idea or this commitment to one very specific way of how breastfeeding should look is really what can cause some mental health issues if we're really stuck on this one outcome and it's not happening and we're doing everything, but it's not really working for us. I find that when parents decide to shift how they're feeding their babies, whatever direction that shift takes, is much easier on the mental health, and you have a much lower risk of developing guilt or just tough emotions around it if it's an empowered choice. Now, you get to make a decision if you're having breastfeeding difficulties. Okay, we're going to try this action plan that our lactation consultant created. We're going to try it for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 days, whatever the milestone is. And you get to check in with yourself at that point. If you, in a frenzy in the middle of the night when things are really difficult, you're like, this freaking sucks, I'm not doing it anymore, we're done. That is when parents tend to have regrets later on, or it's just harder to integrate that process versus, hey, we tried it for 3 weeks. We said we're going to evaluate it on June 1st. June 1st is not really working. Okay, so we get to make the decision from where do we want to go from here. And it's a much more empowered choice.
And it seems like it just inherently takes some of the self-judgment out of it as well. It's like if you have that mark on the calendar of here's when we evaluate whether or not this thing we're doing is working, then it's like, it's not, oh, I'm in the middle of a failure and I'm giving up. It's no, we already planned, we were going to take a hard look at this. And it's a lot easier to be non-judgmental toward yourself in situations like that, I imagine.
And you can also choose when you check in, hey, I'm not ready to make any different decisions yet, so let's push our date out. We're checking in today. Let's check in again in another 3 weeks. So whatever that interval is, you get to choose.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears here and tell you guys a little bit about Alana. I have permission to share her story. Alana is a client of mine, and I met her when her baby was a couple of days old. And it became very quickly apparent that there were a whole host of breastfeeding issues going on. There was pain. The baby wasn't really latching very consistently. And when she did latch, it hurt. There were milk supply issues. And the baby had some other health issues going on. Now, in the beginning, Alana had a deadline. And then eventually it moved out. And it got to a point where even with their team of providers, things weren't really working with latching the baby. So she decided to exclusively pump, which just meant it was important to her to still provide breast milk to her baby for the immune benefits and all the health benefits. But the process of actually getting the baby to take the milk at the breast wasn't working for her. And she believed that she could breastfeed. She did not give up. She knew that the idea that she had before baby was born about latching and feeding at the breast wasn't quite working, but she knew that she could still do it. And she did. And eventually, one day on a random Tuesday afternoon, when it was her last check-in date, like, let's see how things are going. If it's not going well by then, we're going to throw on the towel and we're going to shift to formula or whatever the idea was. When her baby was 6 months old, she latched. And they had been through so much, lots of intervention. 6 months, her baby latched, and they continued to breastfeed well past the baby's first birthday. And when she stopped, it's when she decided to stop. And when the baby was ready, when she was ready. So I wanted to share that story because it was one of the most complex cases I had worked with families on, and it worked out well. So I want to talk a little bit about what went right in this scenario. So protect, going back to our pose framework, she protected her milk supply. Even though her baby was not latching or breastfeeding at the breast, she continued pumping to continue producing milk. And her outlook, she was very, very dedicated to providing breast milk for her baby. And when it didn't work out in the exact form that she had imagined, she was like, okay, we're going to switch gears.
Right.
I still have some feelings about it, but I'm choosing to pivot this way.
Yeah.
She had a sustainable plan. She was able to keep up her plan for 6 months until her baby turned to that 6-month point. And she wasn't expecting the baby to latch, but she said, hey, let's try it. We've done all of these interventions. We've had such great support. Let's see if it works. If she had thrown in the towel after 2 weeks or 3 weeks because she was doing a plan that was just too much and she just had to stop because it didn't have enough support or resources or energy, she wouldn't have been able to breastfeed for well over 9 months with her baby. She had a team of experts, and in this particular case, it was more complex. There was lots of health professionals, doctors, lactation consultants. There was a lot going on, but she had a holistic team, and each person had their own specialty, but we all collaborated to make sure that we were helping them from that holistic standpoint. And she also had that exit strategy saying, okay, I've been doing this for this long. This is my date to evaluate how it's going. We're having that conversation about return on investment. And if it's not working, I know that I tried my best for as long as I wanted to, and then I made a different choice. So that's what happened for Alana and her baby. Now, this is the part where I talk to you a little bit more about how I can help you. And you guys have probably seen as you registered, Breastfeeding in the Real World is my breastfeeding prep course. And with this course, I'm really interested in helping parents build that self-efficacy. The knowledge that you need, understanding the normal course of breastfeeding, and also some of the pitfalls, some of the potential potholes that you can look for down the road. So we have a limited time offer before I'll tell you a little bit more about the course. With Breastfeeding in the Real World, the reason why I chose that term is that I don't shy away, again, from the difficult parts of breastfeeding. Any of the classes or the people that say, oh, the breastfeeding is the most natural, easy thing in the world, it's not. It is a natural instinct, but it's a learned skill as well. You cannot just expect the baby to come out and perfectly get the hang of it because you're going to be learning together. It's helpful to know that even though breastfeeding is hard, we can do hard things. We do hard things every day. All of the past year and a half, we've been doing hard things. People don't quit breastfeeding because they have issues. They quit because they have issues and they don't know how to get over them. And they don't have support to get over them. They don't have the knowledge. When you have the knowledge how to help yourself, what to look for, how to know when to call in reinforcements, how to know if you're doing it right, how to know what's normal, you'll have a much easier time reaching your goals. And that's what Breastfeeding in the Real World wants to do for you. It wants to teach you some of the most common concerns, in addition to the basics, what we need to know at 3 a.m., some of the theories, the immune benefits, and the positioning, all of the good stuff. And again, the 5 most common breastfeeding issues, how to recognize them, and how to get over them. In the course, you'll have real case scenarios from real clients, just saying, hey, this is what happened for this family. How do we know what's going on? What do we need to do about it to get over this issue or to overcome it? So if you are to sign up for this course in the next 7 days, you can save $50. This course is a video-based, self-paced course. So you get to look at it before baby's born, if you're expecting. And then if you do have one of those 5 most common issues after your baby is born, you can go right into the section that describes the issue that you're dealing with, and it will have the care plan. This is what you need to do. This is who you need to call. This is how you protect the baby. This is how you protect the milk supply in each of those scenarios. All right, that is the end of my little sales pitch for you. I would love to stay connected with you. You can find me at New North Baby on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
Love.
That's all I have.
I am dropping in the link to Evonne's course. So it should be pinned to the top of your YouTube page, just under the description there. But also in the comments, you should be able to just click straight through to that link. As a reminder, we'll send around a replay of this session. So if you missed any of the pose framework that Evonne talked about, the kind of introduction to her philosophy on breastfeeding as a part of holistic family health. You'll be able to access that. You can also access it from the YouTube channel, the Discover YouTube channel. Please join me in thanking Evonne for joining us here today and sharing this wisdom. Those of you who are watching live, really curious to know if this is resonating with you, or if you are expecting, or if you are a new mom, what are the things that are coming up for you as questions that you've had, or maybe things that you've heard. One thing I've been struck by, Evonne, is the number of sound bites that seem to be associated with, a breastfeeding journey. And I have, as somebody who hasn't fully done a deep dive into that type of research yet, because I'm still like a few months out, but there are things that have filtered in that you addressed in your presentation that make a lot of sense to me as to why it might be damaging, like having a lazy boob. Like, I get why you probably don't want to internalize that mentality, right? Or that your baby's a lazy eater. And it is such a, you mentioned how American the sort of sentiment is of being tying our assessment of how much milk we're producing to our sense of self-worth. And that's something that I'm taking away as an observation of, that it does seem like there is this mentality that we have that maybe comes from unchecked assumptions, or maybe just not having enough knowledge to understand what the other options are, or to really be able to feel that importance of the parent's mental health, your own mental health as you're breastfeeding, being a weighty factor, maybe as weighty a factor as your ability to execute on your breastfeeding plan from top to bottom without any alterations, right? I really appreciate what you had to say about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and lots of comments and love coming in here from our live audience, which is really lovely. If anybody has any final questions for Evonne, by all means, send those in. I'm curious about a couple of things, if you don't mind, Evonne.
Yeah.
So the typical issues that folks encounter, because I love what you said about the fact that breastfeeding is a natural process, but something being a natural process doesn't make it easy, right? And it's a skill that you can cultivate, and there are biological factors that might influence someone's ability. I mean, in the same way that, a certain type of athletics, or any type of skill, there might be some combination of factors that contribute to your ability to kind of master that skill, or if you have things that just kind of get in the way of that. We wouldn't judge someone for having, I don't know, diabetes, for example, but we might judge ourselves for not being able to breastfeed the way that we have imagined that we would.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about where you think some of that comes from, and I guess I'm thinking about it from a perspective of getting into the mentality of kind of separating the self-worth from, our ability to execute a plan. Do you think it's an influence from our previous generations, like where we grew up, but what is it? Is it societal? And why does it seem to be more of an American thing? Yeah, I guess it's and all of the above.
So I speak a lot to particularly American mindsets and cultures because that's where I have the most experience. But I do know some of the more human qualities, sometimes equating self-worth doesn't have to be specifically American thing. There is a lot in how a parent puts their value. It's like we don't really get very many kudos for being a parent, so a lot of people will oftentimes seek external validation just because they're not getting, they haven't seen it modeled, that internal validation of doing it right, because there
Right.
is no right. Also, especially in the States, where many developing countries will look to us as like the standard, although that may be changing these days. We have a whole generation that wasn't breastfed because formula was considered to be the choice, the wealthy choice. If you could afford formula, you could do that. And breastfeeding was considered for the lower class.
Right.
And so we lost that knowledge. Really, we used to kind of just watch people breastfeed growing up as a kid, and it was very normal. People didn't cover up because it was just popping the baby on. But now there's so much stigma and so much sexualization of breastfeeding, and we see all these things about people breastfeeding in public and people asking them, can you put your boob away? And it's like, there's a kid on it. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So we've lost that knowledge just from practice. And oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it's so interesting because I as you're saying that, I'm just sort of reminded of the idea of having a wet nurse or being very, very popular for wealthier classes, and I sort of had forgotten about the kind of class indicator that
racially as well. Especially in the Black American community. Black Breastfeeding Week is next week, August 25th. August is National Breastfeeding Awareness Month, and there is a lot of trauma, especially in the African American communities, because we were largely the families who were forced to wet nurse in that way. And so for especially African American families, there's a lot of layers wrapped up in breastfeeding for them.
Yes. And it's I appreciate that the nuance there also, just of how many different factors kind of play into our internal experience of something like breastfeeding. And I imagine, I think pregnancy in a lot of ways, for me anyway, especially during COVID, there are things that are very isolating about it. I was telling a friend the other day that to me, being pregnant feels like the weirdest thing in the world, but people don't, I feel like I'm walking around in like a Burning Man costume or completely naked or something, and nobody's even taking notice. Right. And because it just is a very, it's being a pregnant person walking around is kind of a normal thing. But so there's a way that your social experience, or like you mentioned, generational trauma, racial factors, class factors, that can kind of weave into your own internal assessment there without you even realizing it. And I love, what you said at the beginning of your presentation, talking about the kind of holistic approach and even within the different experts that you might talk to, or the different communities around parenting, breastfeeding, prenatal health, postnatal health, all of these different kind of factors might find their way into your psyche in different ways at different times. So I appreciate your laying it out as this kind of holistic picture, because it can be really hard to fight through your sort of blinder lens on something like that when you're in the middle of it. So it's really helpful just to kind of have somebody real talk to you of like, hey, there's lots of stuff going on here that you're not processing at every given moment, right?
And it depends on how much support we have too. When you're in the throes of it, sleep deprivation, emotions, hormones, if you've just given birth, your hormone levels are at an all-time high right before birth, and they all come plummeting down right after. Right. So it's harder to see the forest for the trees. And that's why it's important to build your team so that they can help you zoom out a little bit too, because you tend to be hyper-focused on the baby, because it does feel like your most important job, keeping this little wriggling creature that can't talk to you and tell you what it needs. You have to keep it alive. So you're trying to become a mind reader, and that's a little bit tricky.
It's a lot. Well, I thank you so much, Evonne, for joining us today. This has been incredibly useful, and I am just really honored to have been able to have this conversation with you. We had lots of really great feedback from the comments here, and folks at home, you'll be able to replay the session, like I mentioned. The link to Evonne's course is posted at the top of the link, or at the top of the comments. So check that out as well. Like she mentioned, there's a really lovely, generous discount for the next 7 days. So anyone who is registered to attend this event has access to that. And it'll show up just in your, right in your cart if you go to purchase Evonne's course. Evonne, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today and your energy, and for the brief interlude there. Always appreciate the ability to kind of sit and meditate and really be present for this great session. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hope you'll come back.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. See you next time.